Hi, I'm Jo Riddle, the creator, executive producer, and host of the HAPI podcast. The Human Architecture and Planning Institute, also known as the HAPI, is dedicated to understanding the human experience in the built environment and improving its design through education and research. On our podcast, we interview interdisciplinary professionals in fields spanning neuroscience, urban planning, psychology, and the business world for expert insights that illuminate our human nature. Today we have special guest Abigail Sekely, who is the Executive Director of the Human Architecture and Planning Institute based in Boston, Massachusetts. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jo. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to disseminate the information that we so carefully curate at the HAPI.
You and I both know that you are currently the Executive Director for the HAPI. So what sparked your interest and led you to where you are?
Sure. So it's kind of a roundabout way of falling into something that feels right, is what I'll call it, and reflect over the last, couple years of my life, but also back to my childhood and understand how my interests as a kid are just as relevant now. And it's kind of cool to see how you can make a career out of things that you find interesting. So it's been really personally fulfilling to explore these topics. But my introduction to the Human Architecture and Planning Institute was when I was in college. I went to the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. I was lucky enough to have a number of fantastic professors and faculty members guide me along my way. I was an architecture student and I have an architecture degree. But I also took classes in the art history department and in sociology. Relating all of those things into architecture projects in my studios was really exciting. And one of the classes that I was able to take was under the direction of a fantastic faculty member, architect. His name is Julio Bermudez. He was a tremendous influence into leading me to where I am today. I had talked to him and explored more just sort of through the work that we were doing. And that was like, wow, I've been asking questions like this for my entire life, and I had no idea what to call it.
I'm sure being able to label that feeling was probably really helpful in channeling a direction towards something, to have the language describe like what you were interested in and what was inspiring you.
Yeah, absolutely it was. And I think it's something that really launched me to where I am today. And it's funny because Julio also is doing research like the HAPI is doing in terms of trying to understand through biometrics how we engage as humans with our environment. So it's cool to kind of have this parallel track with someone who I admire so much, and also who is kind of a gateway into proving that this is something that can be investigated and is worth studying and worth exploring, not only in an academic sense, but in practice.
Sure.
Which I think is one of the great things that the HAPI does, is that we are actively working to bridge the gaps between academia and research and practice, and sort of bring these silos that are separate into one conversation. From my work with Julio, I took a studio with a woman named Robin Puddick, who is an architect and a tremendous force. She directed me to Anne Sussman's research, which was amazing. So I took a class that Robin taught. It was the inaugural course called Neuroscience for Architecture. And we had different case studies that we investigated. One of them was Anne and Justin Hollander's book, Cognitive Architecture. And that really sort of set the stage. And this was also, mind you, spring of 2020. It was interesting to be analyzing the biological and neurological aspects of our environments in the context of a global pandemic. I started working with the HAPI as a researcher. I met Anne at a book signing in DC. I was living in DC at the time, and I had her book. Anne and a number of other folks were presenting, and I brought my book, and I was like expecting books to be sold at this event. So when they weren't, and I was just the weirdo holding my copy of of cognitive architecture. Anne was like, you have my book. And I was like, girl, I've read it front to back multiple times. Let's talk. And that set the trajectory to where we are now.
Thank you for that. That was, we're kind of getting to know each other a little bit more personally as well.
Of course.
So now that we have a better understanding of kind of what journey brought you to where you are and the things that you kind of value amidst your journey, what do you do in practice now at the HAPI that brings all of that together and like helps move it institutionally forward, I guess?
Right. It's fascinating. So I think the HAPI is really kind of situated at an interesting intersection because we have a board of people with diverse backgrounds. We've got folks who are interior designers. We have textile specialists. We have a woman who is a specialist in aging in place. We have a neuroscientist on our board. We have multiple urban planning and architecture faculty. So we're sort of all pulling from these wells and seeing how they relate to one another. And an exciting project that we recently completed was in collaboration with a whole series of individuals, but it was called the Flower Walk Project, and it was redesigning a bus stop, in Chelsea, Massachusetts. One of our lead collaborators on that was Ad Hoc Industries, and there was Studio Full Collective, La Collaborativa, which is an after-school group based of community members and youngsters in that direct area. So
I think to contextualize the project too, just for those who may not know what this is, I think it is currently published on the hapi.org website. If anyone wants to look into that further, but it was a bus stop redesign, right, where they added art to help people navigate and feel comfortable in the bus stop. Do you want to speak any more to that?
Absolutely. So we were brought in to do a biometric study on this redesign of a bus station. So we took existing photos and videos of what the site looked like, and we worked with these different collaborators and artists and the Department of Public Works for the city of Chelsea, which were amazing. The project was an analysis pre and post design change. Local plantings were added, colors were added, some signage was added. We removed, I think, 2 parking spaces in total and added a Zikla platform. What you would think of as small interventions make a big difference in the everyday use of that bus station. The initial sort of concept for the project was to increase ridership. After the project was redesigned, we collected more images and photos and did a pre and post sort of analysis of that. But from a conceptual level, we can start to measure someone's joy response to a public transportation intervention. And if we can encourage people to have a more positive commute to work, think of the ripple effects that would have in the rest of their life. We know that certain environments produce high levels of cortisol release. So you are putting your body into a stressed state, consciously or non-consciously, based on your environment. And that overall turns into heart disease and other health stressors and indicators of reduced longevity, potentially. So I believe that architecture is a public health crisis. I believe that architecture is a social justice issue. And if we're able to use the tools in our arsenal, like science and biometrics, to help reduce those big, scary topics, I think that it's our responsibility as human beings to do that for each other. If we're able to gather enough data that becomes statistically significant, and we can take that to a policymaker and say, we have the tools, we have the ability to literally build a happier world. And it's just not prioritized in the mainstream construction market, real estate development, et cetera. Because I think a lot of people don't know that this information is out there. Important element of setting up these studies and asking research questions and coming into these communities is understanding the user. Is this a neurodiverse user? Is this a woman? Is this a person of color? What is that context providing to this larger question? I think in a lot of public spaces, those diverse questions aren't necessarily being prioritized over a dollar sign when it comes to value engineering at the end of a construction project.
For how long we've been having this conversation, we've touched on like biology and psychology and public health. And
Yeah.
I think that it's just so illustrative of how interdisciplinary the work really is and how we need all those parts to contribute. And I also liked how you started to touch on the cross-cultural aspect, where that kind of connects to what you were talking about before about not knowing the life experiences of everybody, or like the cultural influence and how that could impact responses to new development, and also how we can be sharers and teachers and learners across the globe. Amidst the aspirations for this research, what challenges do you feel like you face and how have you maybe overcome them?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I'm going to say the obvious answer. Funding is a huge obstacle, and making sure that we can pay researchers or people want to volunteer, and understanding that, just from a business sense, how that logistically all comes together and how we can fund the software and get people to computers that are stable and all of those different aspects. The HAPI has conducted 8 studies using iMotions Online over the last 2 years. And we've had participants from, I think, 6 of the 7 continents. I'd have to pull up my records. But we've had engagement from people all over the world, which is really cool in terms of bringing this conversation to people with very different backgrounds who don't speak the same language, but can have a visual experience that you can then measure.
Same visual language.
Exactly.
Right. Love
that's
that.
really cool. That's so exciting.
That's awesome. If you could give advice to anyone interested in getting involved or inspired in this field or research, what would you recommend?
Gosh, I love that question. I am going to say to be curious and ask questions and connect. So if you find an article that you think is interesting, reach out to the author. Read a book that you think is cool, write a review online. Go to the event where the person is speaking. Put yourself out there in a community where you are able to be accepted and explore these concepts together, because there's so much richness in that interpersonal dialogue that I would absolutely encourage folks to go out on a limb and see who meets you out there.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the HAPI podcast. For more information on our work or becoming HAPI certified, please visit our website at www.thehapi.org.